Assalamu alaikum shabab. Today I'm going to repeat what I explained in the previous lecture and then move to discuss and talk about the points we have to focus on today. So, as for translation, first of all, I told you that translation is not, or what we translate is not any of the language components. I mean, we do not translate grammar or vocabulary, or let me say phonology. I mean, or any of the language components or style. What we translate is not any of these components. Specifically, precisely, باختصار, what we translate is meaning. Translation is concerned with transference of meaning from one language to another. What do you mean by meaning? As far as these language components are concerned. So, as I said, we do not translate any of these components. We translate the function they have when they are taken together, when they sit together, when they, let me say, constitute or make some sort of sentences in a certain context, في سياق محدد, and targeted to a certain readers, وموجهة لقارئ, specific or certain readers. And for instance, when we write in politics, so our readers should be concerned with politics. When we write about or we translate a text, a religious text, so religious text is directed to those who are, let me say, concerned with religion, etc. Literary texts are directed or aimed to people who are enjoyed or who are quite concerned with literary texts. So this is translation. In a brief, translation is or based on two major, let me say, points. The first one is that translation is a process. What I mean by process, it is an activity. So translation is an activity, and the act of translating from one language to another. This is number one. The other is the methods, or I mean the strategies that a given translator follow in the process of translation. So, in a brief, translation is an activity that is based on certain kind of strategies, or what we call methods of translation. Strategies of translation, I mean the ways according to which this activity has been done. So this is briefly the topic the points we explained in the last lecture. So today we are going to focus on the methods of translation, or the strategies we follow when we start translating. So we have discussed the first kind of translation, literal translation. So in translation, broadly speaking, there are many translation strategies, but broadly speaking, they center on two major divisions: literal translation and non-literal translation. Literal translation can be named word-for-word translation, or one-to-one literal translation, or formal translation, or so. But there are certain slight differences between word-for-word translation, one-to-one literal translation, or literal translation of meaning, or direct translation. Though they are the same on the whole, but there is some sort of slight difference between each one of these divisions. So we have literal translation with its divisions, and we have non-literal or free translation. So we are going today to discuss these. We have already explained literal translation, and we said that literal translation is understood as the translation of every single word of the source language into the same equivalent word in the target language. For instance, when we say that child is intelligent, we say ذلك الطفل يكون ذكيا. Even is translated into يكون. Or he is living from hand to mouth, نترجمها إلى هو عائشا من اليد إلى الفم, etc. We have discussed these examples before, and we said that this kind of translation strategy is risky. Why risky? It is full of problems because it never regards the difference between the grammars of the two languages. Especially English and Arabic belong to two remotely different linguistic families. English is a European, Indo-European, West Germanic language, while Arabic is Semitic language. So this kind of translation never cares for the differences in the grammar. It never cares for the difference in the word order. كل لغة إلها نظام تقديم تأخير, and it has its own function, which is different from the other language. So there are many points. We have discussed these before. Today we move to word one-to-one literal translation. It's not the translation of one word by one word, but it is somehow similar to the word for word translation with slight differences. So one-to-one literal translation is the translation of a word or a phrase into an identical word or a phrase in the target language. So that a noun is translated into a noun, two nouns into two nouns, an adjective to an adjective, two words into two words. Also, if there is an idiom, and you know what an idiom is, what an idiom means, also should be translated into an idiom, a collocation into a collocation, a proverb into a proverb, metaphor into metaphor. But literally, there is no space for non-literal translation. So for instance, saying I have a blind confidence in you, I have a blind confidence in you. أنا أملك see أنا أملك ثقة عمياء بك. This is literal translation, but of the whole expression. But this is not that good translation, in the sense that it's not necessarily to use أملك وعمياء. We can say لدي ثقة مطلقة بك. لدي ثقة مطلقة بك. I have blind confidence in you. Also, show me your back. أرني عرض أكتافك. Show me your back. We can use this is though literal translation, but it is not that good translation. أرني عرض أكتافك. Though it is good. We can say اتركني وشأني, something like that. You can use any other translation, because the intended meaning is that not to show me your أكتافك, but to let me alone, or دعني وشأني, something like that. So for instance, another example, this is a mission, or this mission is a can of worms, translated into هذه المهمة تكون علبة مصائب, can of worms. This is though this is literal translation, word not word by word, but the whole part is translated literally into Arabic, but this is not good translation, in the sense that a good translator can find better equivalence in the target language. So ممكن تترجم هذه المهمة وهذه المهمة مشكلة عويصة, أو هذه المهمة بالغة الصعوبة, something like that would be better. So this type of a translation is not good as word by word translation. So it is the same. It is the same as the first one. The problem is with this kind of strategy is that it stick to the source language word order. يعني ما زالت مركزة على اللغة الأصل regardless of the target language. It also insists on having the same type and number of words. كذلك مصرة على هذه العيوب اللي بيها, مصرة على the same word order. But the new thing with these, the good points with this kind of translation, is that it takes the context into consideration. يعني بالوقت اللي word for word translation never takes any consideration to context, ما تهتم بالسياق. No, this one does takes care of the context, and it translates special and metaphorical source language words and the phrases into special and metaphorical TL equivalents. يعني الأشياء التي التعابير المجازية ترجمها إلى تعابير مجازية at the same time, but they are sometimes unacceptable. So not that good translation. So it has its advantages and disadvantages. There are good points and disadvantages in this translation. So you have to be careful when you go through the examples and to try to put them in the best form and best meaning. So this is the second type of literal translation. I mean one-to-one translation. Now we move to what we call literal translation of meaning. A literal translation of meaning, or what is called direct translation. direct translation. There is a big difference between one-to-one literal translation or between literal translation of meaning, not of words. Though these are all listed under literal translation, but literal translation of meaning or direct translation is not the same as one-to-one literal translation. So you have to be careful to know the difference between these two types of translation strategies. This type of translation is concerned with translating meaning as closely, precisely, and completely as possible. It can also be called as direct translation. It is the translation of meaning in context and takes into account the grammar, the word order of the target language. So this kind of translation considers the context of the target language. So it is not a source text-oriented translation strategy. It cares a lot for the context of the target language. Metaphorical and special uses of language are also accounted for in the target language. In this sense, it can be described as a full translation of meaning. This kind of translation is considered the best kind of translation. Indeed, it can be described as the best method of literal translation. It has a different view to literal meaning. Literal meaning is not one single unchanged direct meaning of words, but it's different meaning in different contexts and combinations with other words. So, literal translation, direct translation, is another kind of literal translation, but it looks at meaning differently. Literal meaning, المعنى الحرفي, according to this language, is not one single or unchanged direct meaning, but rather it is different meaning, even the literal meaning, different meaning in different contexts. For instance, when we go to collocations or proverbs or idioms. So when we say that it is a sitting it's a sitting duck, as we mentioned this example in the last lecture, sitting duck. So literally أنها بطة جالسة. This is unacceptable meaning, translation, because this should not be looked at as literal meaning. Its meaning is that when we say about something or somebody that he is or she is لقمة سائغة, يعني أو صيد سهل. When we say about somebody or something, صيد سهل. But also, you have to know that this particular meaning, this non-literal meaning of the sitting or a sitting duck, is the only meaning that this expression has. It is the only meaning. I mean, this is its literal meaning, though it is non-literal, but it's the only literal meaning, because there is no other meaning to this. Even when we say it is running cats and dogs, إنها تمطر بغزارة, this is the only meaning that this expression has. There is no other meaning but this one. So even non-literal, or what we call non-literal meaning, so this is the new definition of, according to direct translation, this is the direct translation of a given expression. So for instance, when we have examples like, if you look at page 10 and 11 of your textbook, you see that the verb run has many meanings in different contexts, about 17 meanings. So among these meanings, I'd like to mention, for example, when I say my nose is running, so run here should not be taken literally. And I cannot translate it. No one translate my nose is running as أنفي يركض or something like that. So the verb run is not يركض, no more يركض here. But أن يعني أعاني من رشح, أن رشح, my eyes or my nose is running. It means أن في رشح, في فلاونزا. But when we come to say that somebody he runs short of money, it means that he no longer have any money. يعني نفذ ماله, or he runs wild, يسير على هواه, or he runs a company. It means ويدير شركة وليس هو يركض. So again, even though the meanings, these non-literal meaning, are the direct meaning of these, when we say somebody runs a company, شخص يدير دائرة, this is the only meaning for run in this particular context. When we say for something, it runs dry, it means that هذا ينضب, something is ينضب, يعني the well runs dry, البئر ينضب. So this is the only meaning, though it is non-literal. So no longer run is meaning يركض here. So this is what we mean by saying, or when we translate directly. This is direct translation, literal translation of meaning. So it is a good strategy among the other strategies, though we have some sort of what we call literal equivalence, literalogy. We have literal correspondence, as we discussed in the chapter about culture. So this is another type of translation strategies. So all the meanings of run we mentioned are described as the only meaning that such an expression has, and they are in one way or another called literal meaning of, the literal or direct meaning of such expression, though it is non-literal on the surface or on the face value. When an expression has only one meaning, no other meaning, it is called the literal meaning of that expression, or the direct meaning of that expression. Despite the fact that the verb run means yarkud, but when it is used in more than one context, in different contexts, like he runs wild, to run across, to run back, etc., run a company, in the long run. So though they are different in meaning, but for each one, every one of them, every single expression of them has this particular meaning. In the long run, على المدى البعيد معناها. So for such an expression, there is no other meaning but this. But when we discuss that, run generally means yarkud, but it has another meaning. The second one we call indirect or non-literal. This is true, but at the same time, when we take when we take run in the long run separately, this is the only meaning that run has in this particular context. So this kind of a translation is the best or one of the best translation strategies. Similarly, metaphorical phrases like idioms can be looked at in the same way. I mean, their metaphorical meanings are the only meanings available in language, and hence also in translation. So, for instance, to beat around when someone says to another, stop beating around the bush. Bush, if we taken separately, it means لا تضرب حول الشجرة أو توقف عن الضرب حول الشجرة. This is the non-literal, the literal meaning of this expression, while its real meaning or non-literal meaning is stop, يعني توقف عن اللف والدوران أو توقف عن المراوغة. But this is the only meaning when it is taken separately. This is the only meaning that such an expression, such an idiom has, or such a metaphorical meaning has. To get the sack, يطرد. He gets the sack, يطرد, يعني he is fired or he is يعني يطرد من وظيفته, etc. Monkey business, أشياء مريبة. This is the only meaning that such an idiom or a collocation has. Tall order, مهمة شاقة, has only one meaning, that's مهمة شاقة, that's all. So we can say that literal translation is committed to the real meaning or meanings of a word or a phrase available in language, regardless of whether it is direct or indirect, common or uncommon, non-metaphorical or metaphorical. So it is intended to the real meaning or the meanings of the words that are available in the language, regardless of the naming we have, whether we call them literal or non-literal, metaphorical or non-metaphorical. What is this type of translation strategy is concerned with is the real meaning or the meaning that is available in language. So literal meaning can be metaphorical or can be non-metaphorical. So a metaphor, for instance, is translated into a metaphor or any other equivalent meaning available in language, not necessarily into a metaphor. Direct literal meaning is retained in literal translation precisely and with no attempts to change it into a metaphorical one. For instance, when we say his efforts came to nothing, ضاعت جهوده سدى, this is good translation. أو تبخرت جهوده في الهواء, this is metaphorical. ضاعت جهوده هباء منثورا. So both are correct, but the first one is better than the second one, because the first one is the real meaning of what is intended in that metaphorical expression. So this method, I mean the literal translation or direct translation strategy, is the best one because this is the translation of the real meaning. You have to put to underline the real meaning, المعنى الحقيقي of a word or an expression in its linguistic context. Not we have more than one context. سياق, عندنا سياق لغوي, فهي this is the real translation or the translation of the real meaning of a given word or expression in its linguistic context as precisely and closely as possible, بدقة وبأقرب وأدق تعبير ممكن, regardless of its metaphorical, non-metaphorical use. يعني بغض النظر عن استخدامها المجازي أو غير المجازي. So this is very important to know more about this kind of translation. So this is the first, or this is the third type of literal translation. I mean direct translation. So now we move to the other categorization, or the other type of translation. Just take 5 minutes break and we will come back.